Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome back to another video. So yesterday, I decided to do a Twitter poll to see what short video for a lesson you guys would be interested in. And it turns out you guys want to know how I personally draw trend lines. So in today's video, I'm going to go over what trend lines are, how I use them, how I draw them, and how they're important to my overall day trading. Let's get right into it. So as you guys know, when I'm streaming, I usually have the matrix up here. I have the big chart here, a couple under here, and then trade idea scanners as well as my video. But today I decided to pull up the full chart just so you guys could see more clearly what I'm dealing with. So I pulled up first an example of SPY. This is a trend that I've been talking about for a few days now, actually. Actually, it's probably been weeks, to be honest with you. So overall, this is the SPY trend that I keep seeing on the daily chart. And I can remove these just so I can go over exactly what I'm looking at. So when I'm looking for trend lines, I'm looking for multiple levels to connect of the same points. And usually the best trend lines are the ones that are either resistance that becomes support or support that becomes resistance. So for example on SPY here, if you go, and this is the tippity top that SPY ever was back at the beginning of the year, you go from, and normally I will do body. So I was always taught to do body to body to body and exclude the wicks because the wicks are outliers. So they are, it all depends on the close of the candle, not exactly what happens within the candle. And that's what I've always went off of. There are multiple schools of thought, but that's why I'm creating the video on how I do trend lines. Not exactly the best way because there is no best way. So we'll go from the body here, and they don't always have to land perfectly. So sometimes you'll get different outliers, but you want the most points to connect at once. Down to this body, all the way down to the bottom. So that was the downtrend that broke when we had that little run back up to 460 in March. And then after that, we sold back down, all the way back down to the trend line, tested it a couple times, and now we've tested it again. So that's the overall bottom trend line that I have for the entire market. Now the top one, you can see, and if you can't, that's fine. It comes easier the more you do it. But if you go from the absolute top body, down through that body, down through here, we have almost a perfect descending channel on SPY right now. They may not be 100% parallel, but it is a descending channel, which is overall bullish whenever this breaks out. But we came down, tested the top, down, and now that we've held a higher low here, we are looking potentially to test the upper trend line within the next few days or a week or so. Now, this is overall big. This started back in January, so this is a long-term trend. Sure, you can look at things like a short-term trend, like currently, let's say from the bottom of this support up through even here, it's rough. So you've only got 2 points to go off of, so it's not the best trend line to go off of. But if you go from the bottom up, this is our, I guess we got a little bit of a wedge going on now. If it breaks below this, bearish. Breaks above this, bullish overall. But we can go to another stock. Let me think of something that's ran recently. Let's see, EVFM. So EVFM doesn't really have much of a daily pattern. You can go from the body here and then go up through these to where it's a rough upper trend line or a bottom trend line that's holding it upwards. And then upper trend line, this, when you see this and there's only 2 points to go off of and there's a lot of upper wicks, most of the time I will go to a whole dollar or the level that it is rejecting or that doesn't want to break through and draw like a horizontal line. And that's where you get the ascending triangle and those type of top blow off patterns, is when you've got a reject, come up, wick off, reject, wick down below, reject, wick down to reject, but the bottom trend still holds. That's an ascending triangle on the daily. So I've made this to start talking about trend lines, but overall, when trend lines connect, they sometimes create patterns. A pattern here will be the ascending triangle on the daily overall. So as long as the bodies of EVFM hold, 118, 120 on Monday. I'm recording this on Saturday. It's on the weekend, so this was Friday's candle. But as long as it holds Monday and it continues throughout this whole pattern, the ascending triangle, the bullish pattern, is still in play. So now more short term, it doesn't have a perfect trend here for me to draw, actually. Let's see. So the best thing that I specifically see, and I don't know if this is going to connect, but just looking at bottom end support, which might even be what I was drawing on the daily just now. So these bottom ends with the body, not the wick, all the way through to this body right here, and then through to the rest of the body. So as you see on the 5-minute perspective, it's pretty much hanging onto this trend line just barely. So you would go, and I need to move it up, I guess, just a fuzz, but body to body to body to body. And then it did touch a wick right here, so it's not perfect. And I've always been told that, trading and drawing trends and patterns is an art. It's not a science. So things aren't 100% perfect when you're looking at trend lines, when you're looking at patterns. But you got to go off what hits the most levels. And as you see, this is a very well-respected bottom end trend line on the 5-minute because it's tested it multiple times and held. And then you've got your 150 level at the top that it just does not want to break through. So once it does break through and confirm over 150, and it had a couple candles here over 150 and then it rejected. But if it can have a day where it trades high volume above here and continues higher, that's the ascending triangle break overall for EVFM. Let me try to find another one that's been recently running that I can think that would have a pattern. Let me see if like AMC. Do this one for the apes. So on AMC, so you can see on this specific day that it pretty much had a straight up pattern. And you can draw body to body straight up here, and then when it finally fell below this level is when it started breaking down. So, and it's not perfect on this one either. It's going to go through a body. But here you got, test, come up, didn't even test it again until here, but it held this trend line up higher, held the trend line again, higher, higher, higher. And then when it had the big red that went below the overall trend line that had held all day long, it did not go any higher for the rest of the day and started selling off. So as you see, this trend line was very important to AMC all day. And then once it finally broke on this candle right here, it did not go any higher for the rest of the day. Same thing for, you could go a little bit longer term here. So let's say you go from the bottom end of the trend here and then up through this body. And it's a little bit, with after hours trading, you get a little bit of weird volume, and sometimes it goes below and holds. But most of the time, the trends are the most important intraday. So not as important if a trend line breaks or goes above, goes below in pre-market and after hours as it means in regular trading hours. And then from the top end, I always go from the body of the top candle, and then you see it goes through the resistance here. So came up, straight line through the resistance here, and now it's got a big wedge on the 5-minute that it needs to break through overall to go higher. So through this level here would be bullish for AMC through 15. But below, and this would be below intraday, is overall short term, at least short term bearish, because this whole pattern is broken now. If that makes sense to you guys. So what I'm trying to show you is, I mean, it's not perfect, but this is how I draw my trend lines. And hopefully it helps you guys see it and maybe draw it a little more clearly now as you go on. Let me think of anything else. Let's see if oil overall has a trend. So on the daily, the bottom end support trend line, and man, it's rough because oil is just so volatile. But I mean, if you went from body to body, 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 and then this huge red day that it had recently was the first day that it had below the trend line. So it looks like it broke below trend line, and that's when it really got big sell-off acceleration. But it looks like it started to bounce a little bit, and oil kind of has a mind of its own with economic factors, with global politic factors, but even it holds overall trend lines. Back here, before it broke out, you can see it had a top-end trend line. So if you went from, it's not perfect body to body to body, but body, 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 it had an ascending triangle created here that broke out, and when it went to the highs near 90. And I always use USO instead of CL just because it's easier for me to pull up and chart on TradeStation. But this is about the same chart exactly as CL. So as you see, it broke through, had multiple green continuation days, and then finally fell down, retested the trend, broke below, and then it got super volatile in this range. But even oil and a commodity like that will follow trends because trends are a big part of trading. They really are. What else do we have that has recently been an uptrender on the daily? This one's low volume, so it's a little harder to tell. Doesn't want to move. Okay, we'll not do that. Let's go to something big like Apple. Apple, over the past few days, has held a rough trend line. It doesn't look like it's a perfect one. Actually, that's not very perfect at all. But it does have a rough bottom end trend. Guess you can go here to here. It's almost too rough for me to even draw. I guess because the market's been so volatile. But that's roughly the trend for Apple right now. So you got the bodies here, a test, a test, a test. This was in pre-market though. Broke back above, retested intraday, and held. So you just try to get it to where it makes the most sense, but it's not, you're not just making things up to make yourself feel better or to help like your agenda with, you think Apple's going to go up, so let's draw like the most bullish possible trend line on it. Let's do things that actually make sense when you draw them, so you're not setting yourself up for failure. Yeah, all these large caps look almost exactly the same because they've been running recently. And a lot of these small caps haven't had good trends either lately. I'm trying to think of something that has had a decent trend set up. So it continues. This market's been so volatile, though, it's been hard to find anything with any type of trend. But so let's say Invax here for an example. This is on the 1 minute. But if you go from the bodies of this big sell-off to maybe this body right here, and then you've got an upper resistance around 76.60, 76.70. It's not, yeah, this one's not perfect. I don't like this one at all. Just disregard this one. So here's Amazon's chart. It's very similar to the rest of the large caps, to where it doesn't have a perfect trend line to even draw. But you just look for things like, see how this peaked out, and then you got a second peak that's lower. You look for things like that to connect, to create a trend line. So that's your upper trend line. And then even here, this looks almost like a flat bottom, which will be a descending triangle, which is actually a bearish pattern. It can break upwards, but it's a bearish pattern overall. So you see, you know, it broke above. This was resistance, 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 broke above, came back down to support, had its run up, and then it's a lower high, down to test this again. So overall, you've got a descending triangle. But I just wanted to go over trend lines with you guys, you know, try to make you see how I draw them, how I set them up, how I go from body to body, not exactly wicks. I don't have so many examples in this current market just because things really haven't been holding that many trends. They haven't been pushing through. Honestly, it's been really tough to even try to specifically trade trends in this market because they're few and far between. But if you can find them and draw them, they are very, very beneficial to you. You can use them to buy the dip. You can use them to see where resistance is. So like EVFM we were going over before, if you buy on these levels, that's your lowest risk. Lowest risk, lowest risk. Because all you're doing is risking a break below this line over and over and over again. And then your scale off points are, you know, near the 150 level. And if it, you know, starts to sell off near 150, you scale some here and you wait to see if it breaks through. And if it does fail, I mean, you can cut your whole position here. You can ride it until here. You can ride it all the way back to down here to see if it breaks the overall trend. But these are your buy, and I know it may be elementary to some people, but some people may be brand new. So I want to kind of explain that, you know, these are your buy levels on your trend lines. Your buys, your buys, your buys. And then these upper levels near the 140s, 150 levels are your sell levels because that's your resistance. Now, over this level on the daily, EVFM has a lot of room. It's got a gap to fill, the 160. I mean, it's got $2 above. It's got a lot of things going for it. But until it breaks through that heavy 150 resistance level, it's not going to go. And that has everything to do with trend lines. So trend lines are very important to trading. They're not the end-all, be-all because you've got fundamental trading. You've got news that comes out that will change the trend. But if you're overall trading something that's been trending for days, like EVFM has been trending up, you buy on the trend lines or as close to the trend lines as possible, and then you sell near resistance. And over that, over the resistance levels, you wait for new patterns to set up. And that it's pretty much as simple as that. It may sound simple, and in this market, it's a little bit more difficult because things aren't holding trends perfectly, but that's pretty much how I draw trend lines. So to go over what we talked about is I like to do body to body. It's important to look for the most lines that connect, but it doesn't have to be 100% perfect because sometimes there is outliers. And trend lines mostly work on things with higher volume, like something with, let me just think of a random stock off the top of my head. Yeah, like RKDA. See, it's hard to draw something, a trend line on this because it doesn't have any volatility. It doesn't have any range. So you need something with range and with volatility to draw trend lines on the short term. Sure, you can go out to RKDA and look at the daily level, and you can get some daily support through here or some resistance on the daily from here to here. But on the short term, when there's not much movement at all, don't try to draw trend lines on something like this. It's not going to help you. It's not going to help you to draw a trend from, here to here and say, oh, we're going to break out of this ascending triangle when there isn't any volume to create an ascending triangle here. This is just a couple candles that look like they have no volume at all. But that's the most part, and that's the key part about trend lines and things like that, is that if you have no volume or volatility in the stock itself, it's not really going to help you. So it works on large caps, it works on small caps that have a lot of volume or that have been trending up or that have news recently. But if you're trying to draw it on something that just doesn't have volume or that's bottoming out, you need to look more towards the daily instead of the intraday, because the intraday is just going to be a waste of your time. But thanks everybody for tuning in today. Thanks for watching the video. If you like the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel so you know either when I post a new video or when I go live. I go live Monday through Friday, 8 a.m., and I try to stay on until around 10 a.m. So I got 2 hours of live trading in the mornings, and hope to see you either there or on the next video. I appreciate you guys. Thanks.